my motherhood is different from everyone else's. My journey is different from everyone else's, and it's been stolen from me. And somehow it's my fault. I had that like guilt and that shame of like, I did this, my body did this, and I don't know why. Even though I was in the NICU every single day from dawn to dusk, there's nowhere else I wanted to be. There's nowhere else I could be. I was glued to my child, even though I wasn't at home with him.
Welcome back to today's show. Today I'm here with my friend Mel Wells. I am so excited for this conversation to talk all things joy in motherhood, the maiden to mother transition. I think we are going to have a great combo. So welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, especially because I am a podcast listener. So I'm very excited to be a guest.
That's an honor. I love to hear that from people. I still think in my mind that I think it's like just me and my dad that listen to every episode. So whenever somebody says they listen, I'm like, seriously, thank you. But yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation because I've watched your journey into motherhood, and I think I knew of you before I knew who you were, because last year when I joined the One Infinity Mastermind, which I've done an episode about, the journey to Peru and all the ayahuasca, Adam and Gerard, who led that, were like, you need to know Mel. She was going to do this, but she got pregnant. We're so excited for her. So I remember hearing your name and being like, oh, she got pregnant. Like, how cool. And then realizing it was you later on and your whole journey into motherhood and how everything unfolded for you was so incredible and magical, and also not easy. You know, you went through some hard stuff that we'll talk about. Now that I know you better and have watched how you express your journey into motherhood and how you're really living into it and loving into it and everything that's come with that, I really admire your take on it and how expressive you are about the truth. And also the work you're doing with the maiden to mother transition, which I don't touch on a whole lot in Motherload, because usually where the Motherload person picks up, they're a couple years in and they're realizing that maiden to mother transition was really difficult, but they didn't have the words for it at the time. And that's why the work you're doing, I think, is so beautiful, because it's growing awareness to try to catch people on the other side to go, hey, if you're on this journey now, let's help you step into motherhood with more understanding and more embodiment of it, so you aren't 3 or 4 years down the road getting crushed by the weight of the mother load and not knowing where to turn. So I'm really, really excited to hear more of your story. Can you start us off by a little bit of backstory on your journey into entrepreneurship and how you got to the point that you were at prior to becoming a mother, and then just a little bit of your journey into motherhood? I'm sure it'll come up more too, but just kick us off with a little of your story.
Yeah, totally. So my journey into entrepreneurship is actually connected to my journey of becoming a mother, because I was 23 and I had been battling with an eating disorder since I'd been 15. It started off as anorexia, then it became bulimia, binge eating. And I was very depressed with it. I felt extremely lost. I had really no clue who I was. Just everything revolved around food and weight and body. And I'd just been so back and forth, felt like I tried everything under the sun to try and help me heal. And this one day I was looking in the mirror at my body. And I would say, this is something that I did every day, every night, because I was so obsessed with my weight and body image and pulling myself apart. But this one day was different, because that day I felt as though I had God whisper into my ear. And God said to me, you really are meant to be a mother. And if this is the path that you're going to keep going down, is this the kind of mother that you want to be? And that was the first time that I'd really felt that peace around, oh, I do want to be a mother. I think I was always kind of thought, oh yeah, I guess I will become a mother one day, but it wasn't something that I was really thinking about too much as a 23-year-old. But in that moment, I was like, what am I doing to myself? the way that I'm being with my body, the way that I'm being with food, like I would never want a daughter or a son to copy this, to imitate this, to learn this from me, to model this. And so it was my maternal instinct that I felt then for the first time, which led me to decide to really truly heal this eating disorder. And I think I'd been going about it from a place of fixing myself. And I saw it through a different lens. I saw it through the lens of I get to heal, and it's time for me to actually love myself and come into a deep surrender of this addiction and a surrender of this disorder and true healing and self-love. And so that was the journey that started me off in the coaching space, was really my own healing journey and my own self-love journey, which all stemmed from that maternal instinct of like wanting to show up as a great mother and not wanting to be the mom who hated herself, was constantly criticizing herself, constantly on a diet. So that's what really got me into the coaching space. After I went on this huge healing journey, it led me to a beautiful understanding of life, of myself, of my body, of self-love. And yeah, kind of been in the coaching industry since then, coaching on various different things, relationships, love, sexuality, business, feminine leadership, and just kind of sharing my journey as I go, really, and building the community. It's given me a lot of just a lot of blessings in my life. I'm very grateful. But it all stemmed from me deciding to go on a healing journey so that I could become a mother one day. So when I did become a mother, which wasn't for like another 10 years after that initial moment, it really felt like such a full circle moment. And I'm definitely very proud of myself for the healing that I did before I entered into motherhood.
Yeah. I think that's super relatable, because I think a lot of us have a connection between how we felt about our bodies and an awakening of some kind that happens around motherhood, whether it happens for you, like where it did for you prior to becoming a mother, where you kind of wake up to go, this really is what I want. And this is not what I want to be modeling, or I don't want to put my body through this, for the eventuality of motherhood. And I think a lot of us, it happens after becoming a mother, where we look at what our new body looks like and what we've gone through to bring life into the world, and have a whole new reverence for that there is power beyond how it looks. And I know I talk about it a lot with the millennial generation. I think there was so much wiring around thinness, that a lot of us still, I feel it myself, even at age 40, having had 2 kids, where as you're talking, I'm like, God, I still do that. Like I still look in the mirror every day and critique my body. I look at my C-section scar. I'm 20 pounds heavier than I was pre-babies. And I've kind of accepted it at this point, but I realize that wiring is deeply seated in a lot of us. We'll get into Sky's birth, because I know that unlocked a lot for you too. But with the body image thing, just because it came up, now that he's here on the other side, you're a mother, you're really living into the new identity. How do you feel about your body today? And how does that show up for you day to day now?
Obviously my body is different now than it was pre-pregnancy. And I think I'm very grateful for the relationship that I formed with my body before going into this journey, because it really is like the relationship that we have with ourselves and the relationship we have with our body. It's all about that rather than how it looks. And so I recognize that my body could be 10 pounds heavier than it was before pregnancy, or 20 pounds heavier. And as long as I continue to show up with love for myself every day, it doesn't really matter, because it's more about the relationship that I have and the things that I'm telling myself and the thoughts that I'm having. So I'm very much enjoying getting my fitness back. I'm 9 months postpartum, so I'm really enjoying having that like 20 minutes every day during Sky's first nap to work out. And I love that. Like I want to feel amazing in my body again, but it's never going to be the same as it was before pregnancy. And that's just like, we just all have to accept that, right? And when I bounce my baby on me and I see him using my belly as a trampoline, I'm just like, yeah, he doesn't care. Like this is his trampoline. This is his, like I see him like pulling at my belly and grabbing my boob, and I'm like, this is his safe space. Like my body is his home. My body is his safe space. And like, it's just, there's nothing like having a baby to just put a lot of things into perspective about how effed up our culture is around so many things. And you see things through the eyes of your child, like your body as an example. And you're just like, this is so pure and this is so special. And it doesn't matter what the weight is, and it doesn't matter how ripped it is, or whatever your goal might be, because it's just the power and the beauty of what you see and how you feel when you go through pregnancy, and your body is that home and that vessel. It gives you a lot of perspective, that's for sure. And
Yeah.
I don't want to ever, tell moms that they shouldn't also take pride in wanting to get their health back and wanting to get their fitness back. I think that's super beautiful too. And whatever you want to do to make yourself feel great in your body again.
Yeah, I think that's important because it is such a balance to look at acceptance and self-love, and also health and wanting to be here for a long time for our kids, and wanting to feel good in our bodies and be able to do the things with them that we want. But treating that goal with compassion and giving it enough time, and not this bounce back culture, or, especially if you had a traumatic birth where there's whole layers of trauma in the body in addition to the weight, that takes time to unpack and unload, literally and figuratively. So speaking of trauma, and, of course, share how much you're comfortable sharing, but your birth with Sky, I know, didn't go the way that you envisioned initially. And you had a NICU stay, and you and I have chatted a little bit about that. I didn't have NICU stays, so I don't have that perspective, but knowing a NICU mama, I think there's a whole different level of that. Motherhood starts with a different vigilance, a different level of vigilance. And other NICU mamas I've talked with have said that word, where it's like, it's very hard after you go through a NICU stay with your newborn to soften the vigilance as you step out into like normal life. What did you experience, and how today, having had that as the start to motherhood, with all the work that you do around embodiment and femininity, do you feel like that vigilance is still there for you? And how have you worked through the nervous system side of kind of releasing the start of life with Sky feeling a little bit medical and touch and go there for a while?
Yeah, I really relate to what you shared about there just being like layers of healing and layers of trauma. And I think in many ways I'm still working through that. And I think when I go through my next pregnancy, hopefully there will be a next pregnancy, then I'm sure there will be many more layers around that and birth and all the things. But yeah, to kind of give some context of what happened, I had a really blissful, smooth pregnancy for the most part, really enjoyed being pregnant, was planning the most beautiful home birth with no medical intervention. And then at 30 weeks, I was just walking the dog with my partner, as we do every single night. And I just started getting these like what felt like contractions. And then I started bleeding. And we called the midwife and said, "Is this normal?" And she said, "No, go into the hospital." And she was like a home birth midwife. So I knew that it was like, shit, like this feels serious. And then I started fainting in the street. And that's when I knew this is not meant to, something is happening here that wasn't meant to happen. And obviously from a spiritual lens, it was all meant to happen. It was all divinely timed, and Sky chose his entry into the world 2 months earlier than what we had planned, but it was a placenta abruption. And I think it's 1 in 200,000 is the chances of that. So it's extremely rare. And they did a bunch of tests on the placenta, and everything was just like, no idea why this happened. Like, just one of those things. So I think I went through a lot of shock, a lot of self-blaming, like blaming my body. Like, what's wrong with my womb? Why couldn't I carry this baby? Like, what did I do wrong? I had a really like joyful, easy pregnancy. I wasn't stressed. I wasn't going through big life events. I was like just constantly questioning, like, why did this happen? Like looking for the answer, and ultimately just had to completely surrender to, we'll never know. They said to me, we've seen a lot more of this since COVID. So it could be connected, but we can't possibly say. And so I really had to just let go of that. But I definitely went through a lot of grief around I don't get to have motherhood the way that everyone else gets to have motherhood. And I wouldn't even be able to log into Instagram because I would see obviously the algorithm when you're pregnant just shows you like pregnancy and birth and everything that you're going through. And so it's showing me all these moms with their babies at home, and I was getting so triggered because I was in the NICU every day holding my baby, and it's not the same when your baby's like covered in tubes and wires, and like I couldn't breastfeed for the first month because he was too young, he didn't know how to feed. And so I definitely went through a deep portal of motherhood has been taken away from me. My motherhood is different from everyone else's. My journey is different from everyone else's, and it's been stolen from me. And somehow it's my fault. I had that like guilt and that shame of like, I did this, my body did this, and I don't know why. And so it was extremely traumatic. And at the same time, I still had that experience where I looked into his eyes and was just like, I will die for you. And like everything completely shifted in my world, and all the oxytocin. And even though I was in the NICU every single day from dawn to dusk, there's nowhere else I wanted to be. There's nowhere else I could be. I was glued to my child, even though I wasn't at home with him. Yeah, there were definitely layers of healing, definitely a lot of vigilance that's still there now. I definitely feel that NICU stay made me just so grateful. Like when we did bring him home, I remember like the night wake ups, I was just joyful. I was like waking up at 2 a.m. just like so happy because for the last 52 days I'd been waking up at 2 a.m. to pump. So so this was like just Christmas morning getting to wake up to do this. And so as soon as we brought him home, I think my motherhood journey since then has just felt just so extremely grateful and so joyful, because the whole like first 2 months was just nothing like I imagined. So then getting to actually have him home and be with him every day just brought me so much joy and so much gratitude, because there were times when I was in the NICU where I thought, what if I don't get to bring him home ever? And it was, yeah. And I want to be sensitive to women listening who have experienced loss, and that is a reality for some people. And so, yeah, after we brought him home, everything just felt extremely, just so precious. And so, that vigilance, definitely has eased like the longer that we've had him home. And I think just getting to see how big he is, I think in the NICU you're like, because your babies are born so small when they're premature, that it's like, I've got to grow, you've got to grow, and like every ounce and every pound is tracked and measured and celebrated. And so now I look at him and I can barely hold him now because he's just so humongous. And I'm just like, okay, this is a very healthy baby. And he smiles constantly, which I think again is just that constant reassurance of like, we have great attachment. Because the NICU, I think I was just so worried that like, oh, I didn't get him on my chest immediately. And, what if what if this affects our attachment? And it just clearly just so hasn't. But I would say the vigilance is still there sometimes, because there are just certain ways in which it shows up. For example, I don't let my partner leave the house with the baby without me still. I don't like anyone else watching him, like haven't been able to get any kind of childcare or nanny, because I just want to be the one there all the time, which can be limiting sometimes. But yeah, overall, I would say it was just such a deep initiation into motherhood that has really made me so grateful for every single moment. I think that's a lot of the reason why I expressed so much joy in motherhood, was because like I almost felt like it wasn't going to happen for me. I felt like that experience had been taken in a way, or shifted in a way. And so I think every birth experience is so much of a surrender, and that veil is so thin between life and death. But it definitely showed me just how precious this journey is.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me because when you talk about how it's not starting the way you thought it would, and for you, it was extremely traumatic, but I think a lot of us can relate to even, planning a natural birth and ending up with a C-section, or, planning to be induced and it starting naturally and or not getting the epidural. Like there's so many different versions of the story where the transition into motherhood that day that the child was born didn't go the way you thought. And whether it was on a massive scale like yours or smaller scale like mine, where I ended up in a C-section after not being able to get him out, the result is still this questioning of ourselves to go, why me? Why didn't I get the experience I wanted to have? And then when we hear other people's stories and go, wow, I actually don't know anybody whose story went exactly as they planned.
Yeah.
Maybe I do and they just haven't told me, but I think it's so reassuring to hear from other moms across the whole spectrum of how the experience went, that most of us come out of that and go, wow, that wasn't what I was expecting. And that doesn't mean that it's any less beautiful or that it doesn't unfold in the way it's meant to. And I think that's why I love hearing you talk about joy. And I know I want to get into like some of the ways you've experienced feedback about how much joy you express, because seeing mothers in their joy and expressing like how much they love to be with their kids and that they don't want to have childcare, someone that just pops on and learns about you in that moment and doesn't know your backstory and doesn't know what happened to cause some of that stuff that you're still working through, to go, I don't necessarily trust a caregiver yet. I don't necessarily want to be away from him to go work for the full day yet. That's okay. But someone that just pops in on Instagram and sees you share that may think like, oh, you're too attached, or how privileged of you, or all these like kind of judgment based things. And this is a really nuanced conversation, but I think it's important to have, because one, it's perception is not reality. And two, we never really know what happened unless we really know the person. We don't know what they experienced with that transition from maiden into mother. And there's so little conversation about it out there that our judgment of each other may be completely overlooking a major trauma that occurred. And, are we dishonoring motherhood in general by being so judgmental of each other? And to tack on to that, why is it so triggering to see a mother in full joy of being mother? And why do we prefer, I think social media has something to do with this, but why do we prefer to see mothers express how hard it is? And I wonder what your thoughts are on that, just knowing what you know about the maiden to mother transition, and also just femininity and feminine leadership, and why are we so responsive to like hardship and not to joy?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I definitely have felt since entering into motherhood. I'm someone that's been online and had like an online presence and community for 10 years. And for some reason, motherhood has triggered people the most, or, and I definitely feel like the most projections, judgments, opinions, shame. And I think it's because our mothering means so much to us, and our choices are so big and so important to ourselves and to our baby, that when someone else is having a different experience, I think it's easy to go, oh, does this mean mine is wrong? Am I wrong now? Even just like the second that I became a mother, like the second that I gave birth, what did I do wrong? I failed my son already. I was like, I'm so sorry that you're here in the NICU. Like, I've done this. It's my fault. And so I've noticed that like when we become mothers, we definitely like have this guilt and this blame and this constant worry around, are we doing the right thing? And there's so many decisions that we have to make for a tiny little human, that we have no choice but to just trust ourselves that we're making the right decision. We don't know what's right or wrong. We have to just completely trust ourselves, and everyone else out there is doing different things. And, I think it's so important that we try our best to just love each other in their own unique experiences of motherhood and not cast that judgment, because like you said, you never know the full picture. Part of my joy in motherhood is because that first 2 months was spent in the hospital. And maybe part of it, maybe I would have been this joyful and this grateful, and maybe I wouldn't, who knows? But I certainly don't feel like I should back up every single post with this is because of my trauma, because that's not the way either. But yeah, I really feel as though we need sisterhood in motherhood, and we need to come together and be a little bit more forgiving and compassionate, because the mother load, as you speak of, and the full spectrum of motherhood is so nuanced and so all encompassing, and every single person's journey is so different.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you and I have talked offline about this. So, I'm on the same page around it. It's just so interesting, and I'm not an expert on it, and I know you're not either, but it's interesting to observe how joy is so triggering to mothers. And why is that? Because don't we want motherhood to be something that we find joy in? And what is happening in America or in the world within motherhood that makes it something that people don't feel joy in, or where they see a mother who has openly expressing her joy, it makes them feel wrong about themselves, and I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. And I'm on the same page as you, where it shows me there's more need for support for the mother, not the parent, but the mother. And that's why I love what you're doing with Maiden to Mother. And I want to talk more about that transition and how you, now that you've gone through it, what felt different than you expected, besides obviously the NICU state, but in terms of identity and you as the individual and you as the woman, what was the biggest surprise for you in that transition? And then in terms of the work you're doing now with it, what's like the root mission for that transition, the community you're building in Maiden to Mother?
Yeah. Biggest surprise for me in the transition. Well, so I started experiencing like the grieving of the maiden in my first trimester. Even though I was so happy to be pregnant and so excited, I started immediately feeling that version of me just start to dissolve and start to leave the building. And I started to realize, wow, life is never going to be the same. I'm never going to be this version of me again. And so I was able to kind of really hold space for that. Oh my gosh, all this amazingness is about to open up for me in this beautiful world and this universe of motherhood. And at the same time, this amazing life that I've created for myself is about to be over in a way. And obviously it's not over, but it's different. It's a completely different life. For me, it's been a completely different life. And so what I didn't expect was, yes, like people always say, like, don't lose yourself in motherhood. I felt like when I entered in motherhood, I found myself. I felt like, oh, this is who I've always been. It felt like a coming home to who I'd always been. It felt like, a wholeness. It felt like unconditional love. It felt like this is the meaning of my life. It felt all of these things that I had never heard mothers talk about. I had only heard about how hard it is, how much struggle there is, how it's just never ending exhaustion. And I don't think I'd ever truly understood or heard people really share about how transcendental the experience can be as well. Like, I felt like this is like a million ayahuasca journeys rolled into one. Why is no one talking about how deeply spiritual this initiation is? That's what I became really fascinated by. And that's when I started really leaning into the conversation and the study around matrescence and the psychological and spiritual journey that a woman goes on when she becomes a mother. And so that's why I decided to create a new community within my community, is to kind of take people offline. I say offline, but it's like into a smaller group where we can just allow ourselves to talk about this, talk about the identity transformations, talk about the massive psychological transformations that we go through as these women who were, highly ambitious, focused on XYZ goals. And then now that I'm a mother, not only how can I still do those goals, but also like, why do I not want to do the same things that I used to want to do? So like, that was a big surprise for me, because I was someone before motherhood who traveled a lot, who's very, very carefree, very free-spirited, jump on a plane, go here, there, and everywhere, like very independent. And I would have said, oh yeah, freedom's one of my top values. Now I would say home is one of my top values. I never leave the house. And I was not expecting that. And not only does it feel a surprise in the sense of I never thought I would be not doing those things, but also the fact that I don't want to do those things. And so I think on an identity level, your desires change as well as, you know, your capabilities and your time restraints and your energy restraints, which is obvious, but actually what you feel drawn to changes, for me at least. So I think that was a big surprise.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm on the same page as with you on all of this. And as you're speaking, I'm like, gosh, this is just further driving home what I have noticed about the mother load as I've done this. We're recording right now. I'm on 50 episodes. And yesterday I was recording the 50th episode and I wrote down just scanning my brain, like all the conversations I've had with women who are, you know, either somewhere between 6 months to 10 years out from motherhood. And every single person has mentioned grief of some kind, about waking up to the grief of that prior version of themselves that they remember and they loved. And yes, they wanted to be mothers, or they didn't, and now they love it or whatever. But we all miss a version of ourselves that we're not necessarily sad she's gone because we don't want what we currently have, but we're sad she's gone because we loved her, you know, and there were things that we got to experience as her that we won't ever feel in that same way again. And I mean, there's so much texture to that conversation. But grief is one of those things that I think when you pull it out of a conversation like this, we don't normally like to talk about grief. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at why is it easier for us to talk about how hard it is? And why do we like to tell new moms, like, it's going to be so hard, you're going to lose yourself, like not find yourself? I think it's because a lot of us don't know how to hold space for grief. And that to me is the work of Matrescence, and the conversation around that transition is helping teach each other and hold space for each other to go, it's okay to like really mourn that you're not ever going to be that person again. That doesn't mean you can't do things that person did, but it does mean you won't ever feel exactly how she feels right now. And that's okay, you know, but I get how hard that is, because we as a culture, I don't think, love to talk about grief. And so for me, that's what comes out when you're speaking. I'm like, there's so much grief there, and it doesn't have to be like grief in the sense that you'll never get over it, but it is grief in the sense it needs to be integrated and discussed and processed. And if we don't have a community to turn to, or leaders who are in the work leading us through it, then I see how it builds resentment as time goes on, where you're like, I just wish I had free time. I just wish I could pick up and travel, but these damn kids, you know, and then that's the energy that you end up projecting onto other people.
Yeah. And I think so much of motherhood as well is so paradoxical, and it's like feeling all this love and at the same time feeling all this loneliness and this grief, and, you know, wanting that independence and at the same time not wanting to be away for like more than 2 hours. So like, there's so much that's like this conversation of both and I know you've spoken about this a lot, and I feel like that's where I think it gets difficult for people to really express themselves, because if they talk about the grief, then they think, is that going to make me sound like I don't love my child in some way, you know? But also, yeah, it's all a conversation of both and. But I feel as though motherhood is such a deep experience, and there is so much joy in it, and there is so much love in it. And I feel I don't want to miss that. I don't want to miss that because I'm so swept up in, wow, this is hard. Because it is hard, but it's intense. And it's like the biggest initiation that I'll probably have ever walked through in my life. And I don't want to miss like the blessings in that and the medicine of that. And so I think, you know, as someone that's worked with different plant medicines and gone in different initiations, I know you spoke about that a lot. They say like you lean into the darkness, you bring love to the darkness, right? And so I think that's how to approach everything that feels hard about motherhood, is like, how can I lean into this? And like, how can I bring love to what feels hard? Because the experience is just such a gift. And I think we can forget sometimes that it is such a gift and it is such a privilege.
Yeah. So I totally agree. And I'm a reverent too of how hard it can be in circumstances that are beyond the control of us as mothers. And I think that's another important tack onto this conversation that I'm interested in your thoughts on is around safety and like, existential motherhood in America. And I know you're not American, but you live here, and observing it from the outside and living in our culture for a while, and then now becoming a mother in America, both safety in your own identity to like really live into who you want to be, which I think you do beautifully and you speak to it. And I know you get feedback on it because you have a large following and there are people that project onto you, but I think you seem to feel safe to express your truth. But so there's kind of like expressive safety and then there's existential safety. Like, do you actually feel safe as a mother? Meaning in your relationships, in your peer group, in the environment you live in, and what your child is exposed to or could potentially happen, that like navigating all of that and imagining that. And that conversation, I think, is a big part of this identity shift too, when we move from individuality and like I probably like you, where I was so independent and, I was successful prior to becoming a mother, where I kind of never thought about mortality, or I never thought about the threat of being somewhere or something happening in a school, or, the existential threat of war and things like that, because I was like, it's just me. I'll win. I'm good. I'll make it. But then you have babies and you're like, holy shit, like any little thing, way beyond just intrusive thoughts, but just like, watching the news or seeing another school shooting happening, or even just cultural pressures or nutrition, where you're like, wow, there's so much to think about. It can trigger like the flight or flight, not feeling safe in your own motherhood. So for you, how has that shown up? And then how do you think that factors into the work of educating or supporting that transition? Is there work we can do before we become mothers that helps us understand how to find safety in ourselves and in our community, so that when we are mothers, when we start to feel that resentment or that fear and it starts to come out as projection or it comes out as hardship, is there a way to channel that and go, hey, you know what this really is I don't feel safe. And right now, what I need, instead of projecting all over Mel because she's in her joy, I need to find safety. I need to solve whatever it is making me feel unsafe right now.
I love that. I love that perspective. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything that I could have done prior to motherhood that would have prepared me for the constant feeling of our safety being threatened. I was very much like you. I was like, oh, it'll be fine. Oh, whatever, it'll be fine. I would travel places, not bother with health insurance, whatever. Like, I'll be good. I'm fine. And now it's like, yeah, I read something about when a woman goes through pregnancy, there's a part of her brain that quadruples in size. And that part of the brain is the part that is constantly looking for threats or potential threats to safety. And it never goes back. It just stays quadruple sized forever. And I'm like, oh, now that makes sense, because like every single thing, there's like, I'm constantly worried about everything. And there's so many fears now for safety. And then you see the school shootings happen and it just everything just feels like, what on earth? I'm still only 9 months postpartum, so I'm very much still, we stay in the house. We don't leave the community very far. And I imagine that motherhood just gradually feels like the longest, most drawn out letting go. And it just, every time they get a little bit more independence, it's a little bit more scary. And I imagine that God has designed it this way so that we get to do it very gradually, because it's all our nervous systems can really handle, right? So at the moment, I'm in the place where like he's in the house. He's in my bed, he's in our bedroom, he's in the nursery, and we go, sometimes we go out into Austin and then we come back home, and that's all I've got. When he's going off by himself, that's going to be a whole other deal, but I trust that at that point, my nervous system will have calibrated to the place where I can like, okay, I think I'm ready to hold that capacity. And it feels like motherhood is just this constant stretching of our capacity of what we can hold and what our nervous systems can handle with regards to our babies getting more and more independent. But no, it's terrifying. It's constantly terrifying. Yeah, and I can imagine having multiple kids just out there in the world being themselves, whew, that's going to be a lot.
Yeah. Well, and it is this balance of, and you probably feel this too, I don't want to project or live in fear, like I don't want to have this energy of fear around me all the time. And I think I do a good job of not being that way, but a lot of that then becomes internalized, where I have these thoughts of like, why, I've never thought about the ramifications of what happens if we do get attacked by all these other countries that you're constantly seeing on the news. And I don't really watch the news, but I hear, I read, and then I'm like, okay, why is my brain immediately going to like, we should buy a bunch of food and prep and like have some guns? And I'm like, wow, this is not, I don't know if this is me really thinking that, or if this is a maternal, like mama bear, literal primal instinct going, prepare, protect, be ready, be vigilant. And I'm like, wow, this is so interesting, because me, Lindsay, the identity of my individuality is more akin to say, I got it. I trust the universe. It's going to be okay. But the mom in me, the maternal, that part of the brain that has grown 4 times is like, nope. We better buy bags of rice that we need to be prepping. And I don't want to succumb to that. But I also don't want to be the person who ends up, having her children harmed because she didn't prepare. So these are the thought loops that I think a lot of us go through. And there's so many versions of that depending on what your fears are and what is truly like threatening your safety. But I think it all boils down to what you said, that it's nervous system calibration. And that nervous system calibration is meant to happen really slowly biologically. But we live in a time where we're getting stretched overnight. You're like, well, you got to worry about this thing. You got to worry about this huge thing, which isn't really the biological like way it was supposed to unfold. And that is so difficult. And another reason why I think these communities of mothers who are in a similar experience as you are so powerful, because it normalizes going, yeah, we're not supposed to hear about school shootings. Like our primal nervous system brain never intended that to be a threat to our young children. Like school is supposed to be a safe place. And so when you hear something like that, it is so incredibly jarring and shakes you up so much, because it's obviously tragic, but because your nervous system literally biologically goes, wait, what? Like this does not compute. And I think that the only place we find true regulation in those kind of moments is with other mothers to go, I feel it too. And I don't know what the answer is, but we can sit here together and be reverent of it.
Absolutely. And I think something that I keep receiving along this motherhood journey is those instincts, those primal instincts that we feel. Like that is how we were designed. Like that's how God designed motherhood. It's to protect our babies from predators. It's to protect our babies and keep them safe. We're not meant to be making our babies independent before they're ready, because we're their protectors. They're meant to be attached to us. We're meant to be their guardians. And so there's a reason that we feel those instincts. And I personally feel if I ignore those, or if I try and justify not trusting them, it just feels so wrong in my body. It just feels like a no. It just feels, I can't deny that primal instinct, no matter how many books or courses tell me, oh, don't worry about that, do this instead. It's just a hard no. And I think when our bodies are giving us those signs, like that is the mama intuition. And I'm so grateful for all the times in my life that my mum trusted her intuition and her instincts to keep us safe. And, I grew up in the UK, so we didn't have shootings and things like that. But plenty of times that my mom trusted her instincts on something that she could have chosen otherwise, or followed someone else's advice. And so we can't deny those primal things that we feel. I think they're real indicators.
Yeah. How do you feel doing so much work with femininity and like feminine leadership, embodiment? I know you've led work on relationships and sex and all of this stuff that's really about getting into the body and being present and surrendering to what is the somatic experience, not the external projected experience. How do you reconcile that with what we're just talking about, and learning to take what you learned prior to being a mother and apply that now when you're feeling out of sorts with the fear and the safety and the consideration of nervous system vigilance in motherhood?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole other experience. And I feel as though, part of honoring the feminine and part of honoring our experience as feminine beings, if we choose motherhood or if motherhood chooses us as a path, then that's a big part of the story, right? So it's like, how do we navigate all of these new experiences that are in motherhood and continue to come home to our body and to feel safe in our body. And I think I've found a lot of peace in honestly just a lot of surrender to the beauty of the experience and seeing the beauty of that experience of, yeah, this is terrifying, and how beautiful that this is how I've been designed to be in this primal connection with my baby. And yes, a lot of life is now feels more scary because I'm a mother, but how beautiful that I get to experience this. Like, I want to experience the full spectrum of motherhood, not just certain aspects of it. So this is what I asked for and this is what I've got. And so with every initiation and era that we're in life, I think it's always just about fully accepting and bringing all of ourselves to what we're being presented with.
Yeah, and being really in the body and trusting ourselves. And I think that's what comes through in knowing you and your work. It's this constant reminder that our intuition is there for a reason. And if you feel disconnected from it, that's an invitation to come back in and do some of this work around embodiment and feminine energy and stuff, to go, oh, I have been overriding a really loud call telling me to do something or not to do something. And why is that? Not to come in with blame or shame, but to go, it's how curious. When did I move away from this intuition? Why did I stop trusting myself? Who or what created a wound or a trauma for me that taught me that my body is not to be trusted? And I think that's one of the first places to start, whether you're a mother yet or you are already a mother, to go, how do I keep coming back to myself, home to my body and my intuition? And from there, make the decision about the things that are grief, the things that are fear and safety, the things that are around freedom and time and all these questions we have that feel hard, as mothers. So much of that is rooted back in the body. But I think a lot of us in that transition from maiden to mother, we disconnect from the body because, like you, we have a traumatic experience where we don't trust our body anymore because it didn't do what we thought it should do. Or we don't nourish ourselves after becoming a mother, and we go right into, our culture is so focused on keeping the baby alive. And there's not a whole lot of healing of the identity of the mother or healing of the body of the mother, where it's so easy to kind of stay disconnected from the feelings because you have to jump right into survival mode. That's why it's so important to do this work. And the work that you do is, especially in that maiden to mother awareness, is so important, so that you don't get years down the road and wake up to it and go, oh man, so many things are off here. Where do I even start to heal? So the last thing I wanted to ask you about, what you said just reminded me of, is specifically around love and relationships and how that factors into this early motherhood time and your experience of it. You put out a bunch of reels when Sky was newborn, and they were hilarious. And it's like, Sean making fun of you and you making fun of him, funny in a funny way, about all the reactions and the habits and like the funny things happening. And I was like, this is so beautiful to see partners who are really in it with each other. What did you experience in your relationship in those early days, navigating the trauma of the NICU, but also early motherhood with a partner who's very present and very involved with you?
Yeah, I would honestly say our experience just brought us so close together. It just brought us into such a deep bond, such a tight unit, and I think, an experience that could be described as traumatic tends to do that. So yeah, our experience was, we went through it all deeply together, day in, day out. And then when we were on the other side of it, we were just so grateful, so in love, so overjoyed to have him home and to finally get to be with him just constantly at home. We've honestly just been in so much gratitude. And our journey is very different. We're also a relatively new couple. We met and conceived, and So we only have really known each other as expectant parents. So that's just like a little bit of info of our story. But
I was only with RT. RT and I were only together for 6 months before we were pregnant with Sawyer. So similar. And
amazing.
To me, I'm like, I don't know, it was destined. I never questioned it. I mean, we went through hard times and we had to kind of do some catch up on the stuff we missed, but we never questioned that the baby was meant to be here and meant to be ours. And then he came out and I'm like, well, he's a freaking dead ringer for his dad. Like you are. I had a medium tell me that at one point when he was like 6 months old, that they have a soul contract and that they have been together in many lifetimes. And I was just like, see, it was all meant to be. Yeah. But yeah, like learning each other, knowing each other only really as parents and journeying through parenthood together, I think it's an opportunity, you know. I mean, it doesn't work out well for everybody, but it also can be the most incredible experience, especially navigating so openly, you know, the ups and downs and trusting that that person is your person to navigate hard things with, I think is what we're all ultimately after from a partner, is to know they are our safe place to go, this is really hard or this is really beautiful.
And I think like trusting that the soul of the baby chose their parents. And so whether it doesn't need to look perfect, or it doesn't mean that you guys never fight or don't do things the exact same way. But like I've always had that belief of like the baby chooses the parents. And so whatever their destiny is and their karma is for this lifetime will be lived out. And so that's always been my belief, and that's always been Sean's belief as well. And so we really came together and felt this baby's meant to come through now, and he came through on his own timing. And yeah, we both have been in just so much gratitude, so much happiness. Becoming parents is both of our biggest dreams, was to become parents. So the bumps in the road, we work through it and we figure it out, but it definitely doesn't compare to the gratitude that we feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Anybody listening, I encourage you to follow Mel and Sean, because they share so much of it's such a positive experience. And it's not to say that you don't have your struggles, and I know you do, but that I don't think we always see people expressing joy and really like loving their partner and loving their partner as a parent and honoring their partner as a parent as much as you guys do. You're one of the few people I see really do that regularly and so genuinely. And I think that, you know, it's another example of maybe the story didn't unfold in the traditional way. And maybe there's somebody that picks up and sees it goes, weird, you know, because they don't know the whole story. But once you experience people who are really in full gratitude and full joy of being parents and of loving the new identity of the person that they're with, there's so much to learn just from proximity of that energy. And I think I want to acknowledge you guys for that, because it's rare to see that. There's so much like reels that go viral and all this stuff where it's criticizing the other parent. You know, it's like mom takes on everything. And
yeah. And it's also like, what is the reality that you want to live out, and what do you want to model? Like, what is the blueprint for relationship that you want your babies to see? Because we're co-creating that every single day. So if we're not in the relationship that we want to model to our babies, then that's up to us to start doing the work, to shift, to take responsibility of like, okay, where am I projecting my unhealed stuff? Where am I, you know, still reenacting my mom's trauma, my grandma's trauma, my beliefs around men, my beliefs around motherhood, my beliefs around fathers, you know, where, like, how can I unpack and do my side of the work so that we can come into a healthy dynamic that our babies are going to get to be around and our sponges to every single day. So something that we are really big on is just creating this culture in our household of appreciation. So we're just constantly saying thank you to each other for everything. So like today has been my work day. Sean's been with Sky all day. And like every time I've popped in, I've said, thank you so much. Like, have you guys had an amazing time? Like, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for doing this. And he's like, thank you so much for working. Thank you so much for bringing in, providing for our family. Thank you so much. And we're just constantly saying thank you to each other. and letting each other be seen, so that neither one of us is feeling like, oh, I don't feel appreciated enough, because I think that can be the thing that can lead to a lot of resentment building. So both of us are like, we don't get to the household chores very often, like things get left, laundry piles up, sometimes the house is a mess, and we still say thank you to each other for doing what we managed to do, rather than like, oh, this didn't get done. Like, who cares really? Like it'll get done eventually. It's not the most important thing. And it's more important for us that we're in a household of love and appreciation for each other than a super clean, tidy house at all times.
Yeah, that's the place to end, because that's the thing I think it all boils down to is ultimately all we want is for our kids to know that they're loved and to see us be in our own self-love, right? To witness a mother and a father who are happy with themselves, because ultimately nothing else matters. Like the house can be tiny, it can be huge, it can be messy, it can be clean. They will only remember, as we all do, we only really remember how our parents felt to us, not how the house looked or the nice things we had. It will always be mom was this or dad was that. And I think if we can be conscious of that day to day, all the rest of the things, as you said, will fall into place. So thank you so much for sharing everything you did today. And before we wrap up, will you tell people where they can find you on the internet?
Of course. Yeah. Come and hang out with me on Instagram at I am Mel Wells. And yeah, we'll figure out a journey together from there. But that's where I'm hanging out. And I have a podcast also called Love, Sex and Magic, which is currently on hiatus because I need to figure out how to do this with a baby now. So love to hear how you managed to navigate this, Lindsay. But yes, come and find me on Instagram, podcast, and yeah, I would love to hang out and connect with you guys.
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you again for everything that you shared.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for being here, and I'll see you on a future episode.